layers, so many layers of history that when you see this basilica sister on the ground, you see that columns that are used to support this construction were taken from about 30 pagan temples from in different corners of the empire. Some of them were already obsolete and they were not used, but it's a very interesting example of the city of Istanbul.
They were built to ensure a water supply during a siege. The cistern, located 500 feet southwest of the Hagia Sophia, was first constructed during the reign of Constantine in the 4th century and was restored and extended by Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. There was once a basilica located above, hence the name. Well, I'm down in the cistern. As you can see, it's very dark here. And these are like just the little aqueducts that were built probably 1,000 years ago. Unfortunately, I don't have any more light, but there's a lot of columns in here. Maybe you can see the arches up here. This cathedral-sized cistern is an underground chamber approximately 453 feet by 212 feet, about 105,000 square feet in area, capable of holding almost 3 million cubic feet of water. The ceiling is supported by 336 marble columns, each 30 feet high, arranged in 12 rows of 28 columns, each spaced 16 feet apart. The bases of 2 columns feature blocks carved with the image of Medusa. Tradition has it that the blocks are placed upside down and sideways in order to negate the power of her gaze, because legend has it that the Medusa had the power to turn people who looked at her to stone. However, it's widely thought that one head was placed sideways only to be the proper size to support the column. 52 stone steps descend into the entrance of the cistern. The cistern is surrounded by a fire brick wall with a thickness of 13 feet and coated with a waterproofing mortar. The basilica cistern's water came from a water distribution center in the Belgrade forest, which lies outside the city. It then traveled through 2 aqueducts to get here. There's a few creatures down here, some type of fish. I'm not sure what they are. Probably can't see them. The basilica cistern.
Okay, so right. That's one of the things that gives you idea about the size of the city, right, and about level of expertise by development, right? So is this one would be later period around, I guess, Emperor Justinian, 6th century. But even 7 hills that were in Rome could also be found in Constantinople. Okay, now I'm going to show you the overview of the city. Okay, that is reconstruction, of course, but still works for us. Okay, now.
How to stop buffering issues anywhere, anytime, instantly.
Well, sure, you're not sharing.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Right now it's going to share it. Yeah. Okay, I checked, Andrei, I checked share sound here, but it might require me to download something here. Let me see, GG.
If you want, I can send you the link.
Audio, please install Zoom audio device. Mm-hmm. Oops, that's not what I want. Sorry, that's not what I want. Again, this is supposed to be the 13th century, but you see this hippodrome, and right there in the middle, there are various monuments taking throughout the empire. That what makes Constantinople an imperial city, that you see there are things brought from Egypt, brought from elsewhere, and you live here, you are a resident of the city, and you feel, wow, I'm living in the center of the war. Okay, we are rule the world, basically. That's the feeling that comes out of this. You can see that this area can be locked, right? And there is still this chain. You can see those chains, that chain that was used here to lock it up. Okay.
Father, is there supposed to be sound playing because we don't hear it?
Is he muted? Is Father muted? No.
Yeah, I don't think he can hear us.
Maybe he turned his volume all the way down.
Отец Andrei.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us? His
Yeah.
volume is off.
Yeah, his volume is off.
Okay.
Your volume is off.
Right.
No, I don't think.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now I think you turned your volume on. I think you may have accidentally muted your own computer because we couldn't hear the video and you couldn't hear us talking.
Father, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
Father.
Can you hear us?
No, I cannot hear you.
The video was just silent and you couldn't hear us.
Okay, right. That's basically okay. Whatever. So, right. Okay. Now you are seeing my lecture, right?
Да.
Okay. Good. Good. So, a point from all this that Constantinople for the Byzantines was more important than Jerusalem, and we all products of our times, of our how to say upbringing, and this different attitude clashed with the one of the Western Europeans who, by the appeal of Pope Urban in the 11th century, marched to liberate Jerusalem from the Arabs. Kind of the Byzantines would think, why do you go there? Why do you really why are you so fixated with Jerusalem? Because even in church sense, Jerusalem was part of a metropolitanate of Caesarea. It's just ahead of the Russian church in diptychs, right? It became patriarchate. Paradoxically, I take it because it's mother of all churches, but still it became patriarchate later than every other one. We missed the prayer, Jens. So sorry about this. We just started. We just started. Next time, just remind me, okay, please, because it's just might happen. Right. So after the Battle of Adrianople, the empire was defenseless. But Theodosius the Great, and distinguish between the two, between Theodosius the Great and the Theodosius the Younger, he could afford to pay gods and enlist them in the Roman army. But it took about 100 years to assimilate them, right? But still in the eastern part of the empire, and in the western part of the empire, things were not that smooth. So Theodosius II, right? He reigned for unprecedented period of time.
Which is
And-
that supposed to say Goths or is that supposed to say Goths?
Well, yes, it's misspelled. It's misspelled.
Okay.
Yes, misspelled. Thank you. And you will see other gaffes there, misspelling and grammar problems and so on. Basically, it's also just my notes that I am sharing with you to make it more efficient. Okay, Theodosius II didn't have a hair, and he had a sister who somehow influenced him. And when you think about Theodosius II, you may picture him like that he was sitting inside of the walls, sort of like acronym, right? Like a helpful way to memorize. He was sitting inside of the walls and was writing laws because he was another person who was involved in law codification, and he built the walls that existed until the end of Byzantium and still can be seen when once visits Constantinople. So I'm not talking about church history, right, as is the case in this class. This is important that Arcadius and Honorius, they were in charge of the two parts of the empire. Okay. And Arcadius had to deal with the gods, right? And with their leader Alaric, but Alaric turned from the west to east, and he had Arcadius Stilicho, right? So it's always another thing actually that might be helpful to keep in mind on your checklist is a team. Like Justinian became great because he had a great team, right? And here, this Stilicho, he was able to deal with Alaric, and Constantinople was spared. Okay. As I mentioned, Goths were Arians by their persuasion, and the Byzantines didn't like their presence, didn't like their, as always the case when newcomers and so on, people from different culture, different language, there is natural tensions, right? Especially when they try to control. And Bishop Synesius is mentioned here, who was from Alexandria, who was a famous writer, left many letters, a disciple of Hypatia in Alexandria, was taught in her academy, was educated. Right. So you see that a lot of attention drawn to gods, and St. John Chrysostom's 5th century was Archbishop of Constantinople. And in his resentment about gods, he was supported by many. And the fact that they were allowed to continue their Arian services and so on, it also was considered by many as a sign of weakness. Okay. Right. But another thing to remember, that gods were eaten up by Huns, right, who came from modern day China, roughly. And Arcadius came into conflict with St. John Chrysostom, right? And at this
Theologically?
time, not theologically, but the fact is that St. John Chrysostom, he was an advocate of the poor, right? And he was extremely outspoken. He kind of had no fear, right? And that's not a quality that you can afford if you serve in the palace church, or in the church where emperor or empress, especially, with whom you disagree, praise.
So it was over the poor,
over extravagancy, right? Extravagancy of what was her name of the emperors, right? Morals, right? Yeah. Okay. So relations between Byzantium and Persia were not that bad in this time, which was good because it helped to deal with internal issues, internal problems. Theodosius the Younger reigned for a long time. He, as I mentioned, had a good team, and he relied on his sister Pulcheria a lot. So Persians were kept in check, and Huns became the major enemy. And they received the name of the Scourge of God because they were treated as a punishment for Christian sins. Right? Because Theodosius II, he had a soft spot for education. He opened a university in Constantinople. And again, it's strictly speaking imprecise application of this term university, because it's sort of once somebody says an university, a particular picture, sort of like college town, pops up in one's head. So they didn't have a college town, they didn't have Starbucks, so on. Like it sort of wasn't like Ithaca with Cornell University or anything like that. But they had more or less mentor disciple sort of arrangement, kind of more centered around a teaching figure, but they offered Latin grammar, rhetoric, so another connection with the ancient world. And the reason was to prepare educated bureaucrats. The emperors continued to speak Latin, but nevertheless, Greek becomes stronger as an alternative to Latin. And it was after Justinian, the Latin came out of the use, but still remained in the Byzantine army, as I mentioned, in the form of commands, and still can be traces of Latins can still be found. Right. So legal code, commissioned in 8 years, 16 chapters. It's a piece of Roman juridical thought, and worked with no, he was not a teenager. He was called the younger, in a sense, comparing with Theodosius I. Okay, he wasn't like an adolescent or anything. Okay, now. Okay. So all those revisions of the law, like Justinian's or Theodosius, they, or later ones, 12th century, they try to harmonize all those laws that were around with reality, and indicate which laws should be abandoned, made redundant, and which laws should still be valid. Okay, and it became successful reform, to the point that Theodosian legal code was adopted in outside of Byzantium, right, and was known in Europe until the 12th century. So Theodosius died leaving no heirs, and his sister Pulcheria reigned. But because she was a woman, and that means she was not, how to say, she was not a full person in a sense, right? Because women didn't have full rights, right? It was a very man-centered society, and she could not just be on her own. She could not just be Mrs. President, right? And she needed a man, and that's how she married General Mercian. He was proclaimed an emperor, a soldier type leader, but I mean, maybe it's too much of a statement that he could not read or write, but I mean, definitely he was not an intellectual, just to put it mildly. And the things were that bad that they tried to marry the daughter of Honorius to Attila, right? But once it has been done, Attila could, and I believe she wanted to marry Attila. She was kind of like this idea, but that,
I'm sorry. Can you quickly? Who is Honorius again?
right, remember that empire was divided between Arcadius and Honorius,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
right? So, and Attila was approached Rome 452, and there was also plague, but Attila suddenly died in what is modern day Hungary from hemorrhage attack. So he had a lot of blood, how you called it, coming out of him, and he died it for being blooded. And this sudden event resulted in Huns being disintegrated. And this event with Attila's death affords me a comment that when we study history, right, there are some patterns, there are some sensible repetitions, but there is also a Manus Dei, the hand of God, or historians would say the factor of unexpected, because you cannot really program everything. You cannot really put everything in calculations and expectations, because there is also always something. There is always something like that. Suddenly Attila, who was just fine, but he had this hemorrhage attack or whatever, and he died in the result. And actually, I think he died on his wedding night. Okay, so now, so please meet the Council of Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council. Again, I am leaving theology to Father John, but I would like to approach this as a super important event in the imperial history, which had more impact than 1054. So in 1054, when Cardinal Humbert left his bulla of excommunication of the Patriarch of Constantinople, the empire only had South Italy in the Western world, in sort of in territories of the Latin Christians. So, and those territories in 30 years were taken by Normans, like Bari in Italy, Sicily, earlier Venice. They all were Byzantines, but in this time, in the 11th century, as a result of this schism, great schism, empire didn't lose anything, right? So therefore, it was quite insignificant in this sense. But after the Council of Chalcedon, most of the Egypt became disloyal. Huge parts of Syria became disloyal, because all those monasteries, when we hear during first week Apafecmuta Patrum sayings of desert fathers, and there are various monasteries, all those monasteries, they remained sort of technically called monophysites. I'm saying a monophysite monastery. I'm saying technically because how they believe it's now, it's another story. They may not necessarily strictly monophysite in their beliefs, but a major problem is that they still venerate their saints whom we considered heretics. That's a major problem with people of so-called monophysite churches. But roots of this division are now at the Council of Chalcedon, where very powerful definition of Christ's nature was pronounced, right? So, but in imperial sense, this event became troublesome. And now we have a case study to look at, because it's also a representing event. The empire losing those territories in Egypt and Syria in order to regain them, and they needed them because they needed breeding grounds for new recruits. They needed new tax heads. So they needed those people, right? Uh, and in order to make them loyal, right, they still under the Byzantine uh, patronage in this time, but they didn't really want to remain under the Byzantines. That's why also Arabs were successful, because Arabs let them alone, right? So there were various attempts to get them back into the imperial church. Some of them were violent, aggressive, like communing, sending Byzantine Orthodox abbots to monophysite monastery, forcing them to commune. Some of them were problematic from our perspective. I'm not saying that this was not problematic, but in sense of like Emperor Zeno, he came up with his compromising theological statement, Enoticon, trying to please them, trying to make them uh, come back. And then Orthodox became furious because he compromised the faith. And that's why I'm saying it's a case study, because it demonstrated general dynamics regarding church divisions, right? Okay, so Germanic people around, right? So Aspar helped Leo to advance, but then Leo was called a butcher, but he was called a butcher not just because he butchered Aspar, but because reportedly he was a butcher by his previous profession, right? And now we are seeing that by the end of the 4th century, army becomes once again more local, in the sense that barbarians don't serve there, didn't serve there. Okay, so. So continuation with pushing barbarians, gods away, right? And now Emperor Zeno issues this Enoticon, the act of unity between Orthodox and Monophysite theological unity. And as often with compromise documents, right? Neither party was fully pleased with this. And what is also important to remember, right, that during the first millennium, overwhelming majority of heresies was produced in the East. Very few wrong theological doctrines came out of the West. And that was one of the reasons why the Byzantines, the Byzantine churchmen, Orthodox churchmen, confessor of the faith, they would petition Pope of Rome, treating him as an arbiter, treating him as an authority. So, and this is something that what history does, because history often demonstrates that it takes two to tango, takes two to create a problem. So Byzantines, they boosted also status of the Pope of Rome to the point that Pope of Rome started to get involved with the Byzantines in the 9th century, and to the point that Photius the Great in the 9th century had to push him back, pointing out to his own doctrinal idiosyncrasies. Okay, that's what history does. You cannot just do history to defend your side and saying, well, we are Orthodox, and so everything works for us, and nothing works for another party. That's not history, it's kind of propaganda. But sort of, you see how this genesis happened also of the Roman bishop, in addition to what I said earlier regarding fact that the Bishop of Rome had to represent Christian nation in negotiations with barbarians, because he was left to his own devices by the imperial authority, by the fact that Constantine the Great moved capital from the west to east. I'm not blaming anyone, but I am saying that it's just that's how life is. That's all. Right. Now we are just one short trip away from Emperor Justinian, which is a highlight of any study of Byzantine history. It's coming up. And Anastasius I, he was just before Emperor Justine. Emperor Justine, it's a soldier emperor who was Justinian's uncle, another illiterate man who became an emperor, right? And he, you see, continued to deal with a severe enemy of the empire, Persians, right? Now we also see that there never was quiet time. And the Byzantines, they were blessed, they were lucky that they got this. That it's only matter when somebody will try to take over, try to chunk up a piece of your territory. And in this sense, there were Slavic tribes that started to filling those voids, those territories that were just left by the gods. And Byzantium didn't have enough strength to push them away. And expansion of the Slavs started in the Balkans, and later Bulgarians, right, moved to the same area. Bulgarians initially, they lived in the Volga River, and that was time, 7th century, right, when people still moved around in masses. If you think about Hungarians, right, that Hungarian language is the same group of language where belongs the language of the small ethnic or small nation in Russia, Khanty-Mansi. This is a Siberian language because Hungarians, they went all the way from Siberia to where they are right now in Central Europe, becoming the last settling nation in Europe. So back then it was all right to move around, go somewhere, taking territory and settle there. Okay. It didn't have really sort of like apartment buildings. So it is right now in the sense of every country as an apartment building. They locked it up. They don't want outsiders to get in because everything is taken and so on. So it doesn't really work this anymore. But back then it happened. So Hungarians came from Siberia and settled in Europe. Okay. So end up perfect part of Europe and the European Union, and no one really points out that they are how to say, intruders. All right. Okay. You see with the story of Theodoric, right? That's a leader of the gods, that he wanted to be part of the Byzantine cultural commonwealth. So to give a title, a real title, meant a lot. And that's something that was valid until at least 10th century, when Emperor Basil II, he became godfather to Holy Prince Vladimir, giving him also a title. So to be part of this Byzantine cultural world was a big deal, because it was unique reality, right? Unique reality cannot be faked. Either you belong, it's sort of like if you are ordained, right? If you can show up, you can close up. I mean, you can wear any type of attire, but I mean, you are not really Byzantines, you are not really imperial officer if you dress like that, but if you are ordained, you belong to the church, you belong to the orders, it's real, it's authentic, right?
Ocha, would you say that there's any difference between Roman culture and Byzantine culture in the sense, or are they kind of the same thing?
No, no, I mean, if Eastern Roman culture, that would be identical, but Roman culture, they are definitely different, because Roman culture, that would mean related to Rome. But Eastern Roman culture is helpful. It's a helpful adjective.
So when you say Theodoric wanted to instill Roman culture in the Gothic people, you mean Eastern Roman culture?
Right, yes, 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 I do mean this, yes. Yes, thank you. Right, okay. So we see also replacement of Latin with Greek, right? And the end of the 6th century, the end of pagan world, right? Pagan reality, that teaching of philosophy stopped, right? Basically, it's replaced by theology. There are still treatises of Aristotle, which was highly respected, of Plato, but sort of the ancient tradition, which lived for centuries, Greco-Roman tradition of discipleship and teaching and sort of academia, secular academia, now comes out of the fashion. And at the same time, all the aristocracy was dying out, and all this was nailed, destroyed by huge plague in time of this Justinian, towards the end of Justinian reign. And that black plague was accountable for impoverishing the world, because people were not able to buy goods, and the plague was traveled through with the ships and so on, with rats, and sort of based on diggings, there are much less valuables change hand at the end of the 6th century because of this plague. So world was changing. Okay,